that they are top priority for vaccination. Maricel Halili with the big story.
Isang fake news ang kanilang pinakalat nitong weekend kung saan sinabi na magkakaroon daw ng nationwide lockdown ngayong Kapaskuhan. Malayo ito po sa katotohanan. Una,
this was the response of presidential spokesperson Harry Roque to circulating reports that the government will impose a nationwide lockdown from December 23 to January 3 during the holiday season. Roque reiterated the president's announcement that the entire Metro Manila will remain under a general community quarantine until the end of the year.
Ang susunod na quarantine classification ay ilalabas pa po sa susunod na buwan ng Enero.
Roque said the government understands public concern about the apparent surge of crowds in bazaars as Christmas draws near. If law enforcers fail to control this, an increase in COVID cases is expected. And should this happen, the government will impose a granular or localized lockdown as stated in the policy drafted by the IATF.
Ano bang ibig sabihin ng granular or localized lockdown? Ire-restrict ang isang specific area tulad ng isang household, isang compound o isang kalye kung saan ang mga residente ay na-expose o maaring na-expose sa coronavirus.
To continuously improve the balance between health and opening the economy, the IATF approved the issuance of safety seal certification for business establishments.
Ibig sabihin, pag may certification, meron pong garantiya na sumusunod sa minimum health guidelines yung mga establishmento. So yung mga mamimili, feeling safe kumbaga kung pupunta doon sa merong certification.
Despite the challenges, Malacanang remains optimistic that the COVID-19 vaccine is expected to be approved and distributed by the first half of next year. The government is targeting to purchase an initial batch of 60 million COVID-19 vaccines for more than 24.7 million Filipinos. 1.76 million health workers, both from the private and public sector, will be prioritized for the inoculation. Other frontline workers on top of the list are those from the Departments of Social Welfare and Development, Education, and Interior and Local Government. The second priority are senior indigents with an estimated population of 3.8 million. They are then followed by the remaining senior citizens and by the remaining indigents, which are expected total close to 13 million. Over 500,000 state forces come in fifth. Last week, the Philippines has already secured almost 2.6 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine through a tripartite agreement with the private sector. JG Summit CEO Lance Gokongwei said this was raised to 3 million doses after the private sector, including his firm, pulled an 800 million peso donation to purchase additional vaccines.
At least kalahati nito mapupunta sa DOH, pinaka may kailangan ng bakuna, no? And at this point we follow the guidelines of the government and that we should prioritize yung mga frontliners natin, especially mga medical frontliners natin.
The government targets to immunize 60 to 70 million Filipinos to achieve herd immunity. For News 5, Maricel Halili, we are One News.
Medical professionals may be priority now for vaccination, but some of them still decry not receiving hazard pay under Bayanihan 2. But they are really eligible for special compensation. Greg Gregorio tells us why.
They may not be directly involved in COVID care, but these healthcare workers believe they have every right to get a hazard pay and a special risk allowance as provided by Bayanihan 2. Members of the Alliance of Health Workers protested in front of the Health Department's office in Santa Cruz, Manila early Monday. They said at least 100 healthcare workers at the Tondo Medical Center have tested positive for COVID-19, even though they do not directly attend to COVID patients.
Kahit ang mga administrative staff nagkasakit na rin ng COVID-19, hindi namimili ang virus kung sino yung hahawahan niya.
In its defense, the DOH argued that resources are limited and it is simply following the law's provisions. Administrative Order 35 states that a public healthcare worker may receive up to 3,000 pesos as active duty hazard pay in a month. AO 36 meanwhile provides those doing COVID-19 care up to 5,000 pesos as special risk allowance. The DOH clarified, even without such orders, all HCWs have benefits under the Magna Carta for Public Health Workers.
These workers na binigyan ng additional incentive ay yung mga talagang directly caring for the patient. Sila talaga yung masasabi nating very at risk, no, highly at risk for getting the disease.
Health Secretary Francisco Duque meanwhile expressed readiness to receive COVID-19 vaccine shots once available. Duque even challenged cabinet members to follow suit, but he emphasized he'll only do so upon the endorsement of the Food and Drug Administration. To date, 3 vaccine developers have already secured an endorsement from the Ethics Review Board: United Kingdom's AstraZeneca, Americans Johnson & Johnson's Janssen, and China's Clover Biopharmaceutical. The endorsement makes them one step closer for possible Phase 3 clinical trials in the country. A separate endorsement from the vaccine expert panel, however, is also required before the FDA lays down its final approval. So far, only Clover Biopharmaceutical has secured endorsement from both parties.
Inaantay na lang ho natin lahat na matapos ang evaluation nila. Kung hindi pa ho papasa sa kahit na isa, no, kung sa Vaccine Expert Panel or sa Ethics Review Board, hindi pa siya makakapasok sa FDA process.
The DOH is also preparing for its information drive about mass inoculation in hopes of dissuading anti-vaxxers.
We will be starting already by the middle or third week of December para umpisahan na po ito mga engagement and mobilization of the community.
The government is still in talks with AstraZeneca and Clover Biopharmaceutical for possible procurement of vaccines. Janssen, meanwhile, eyes an independent late-stage trial in Cavite with a local research firm. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
Another Supreme Court justice is facing an impeachment complaint. This time, it is Associate Justice Marvic Leonen that's being met with an ouster bid. Lawyer Larry Gadon, who also went after then Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, filed a similar impeachment complaint against Leonen before the House of Representatives today. Gadon is representing Edwin Cordevilla, who is the Secretary General of the League of Filipino Advocates for Good Government. The complaint notes Leonen's supposed failure to dispose 37 cases within a period of 2 years, which the complainant argues is unconstitutional. The complaint also notes unresolved cases at the House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal, where Leonen sits as chairperson. And finally, similar to Sereno's case, Gadon and his client accused Leonen of supposedly failing to file his SALN during his tenure as professor at the University of the Philippines. Ilocos Norte 2nd District Representative Angela Marcos Barba, a cousin of former Senator Bongbong Marcos, endorsed the impeachment complaint.
Yun lang hindi niya pag-issue ng decision sa 37 aging cases. Imagine that. Siya nga yung number 1 na justice na napakaraming delayed cases. The second ground is betrayal of public trust by not filing SALNs when he was still in UP.
In a statement, Leonen said the accusations are false and were done for, quote, personal and vindictive reasons. Still, Leonen said he is confident House leaders will do the right thing. The palace has distanced itself from the issue. Spokesperson Harry Roque insisted Malacanang does not even know who the proponents are. Earlier last month, Solicitor General Jose Calida and former Senator Bongbong Marcos both sought Leonen's SALN for the purpose of filing a co-warrant petition. They also wanted Leonen to inhibit from the ongoing vice presidential poll protest. The Supreme Court has rejected all of these motions. At the Office of the Ombudsman, a different complaint was filed, this time for red tagging and the spread of fake news. Kabataan Party List Representative Sara Ilago, accompanied by her lawyer Tony Lavinia, filed administrative charges against NTF-ELCAC officials. The respondents are identified as Southern Luzon Command Chief Antonio Parlade Jr., PCOO Undersecretary Lorraine Badoy, NICA Director General Alex Monteguado, Defense Secretary Dolphins Lorenzana, and National Security Advisor Hermogenes Esperon.
Kaya po, nandito kami upang manawagan ng pananagutan at dapat po managot, no, ang lahat po ng responsable at accountable, no, sa napakalalang vilification. At wag natin payagan na magpatuloy ang ganitong grave misconduct, no, sa public service.
We'll go for a quick break. When the big story returns, Valenzuela City makes good on its threat as it suspends NLEX Corporation's business permit in the city. And let's take a deep dive into the Armed Forces Modernization Program and how the country now fares compared to our neighbors. The details later. Good evening, you're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Valenzuela City has suspended the business permit of North Luzon Expressway Corporation over the RFID mess. To give us the latest, we have News 5's Camille Samonte reporting to us from Valenzuela. Camille, what's going to happen now?
Robbie, Valenzuela City Mayor Rex Gatchalian personally went to the NLEX Corporation office here in Valenzuela to serve the suspension order. This after the toll operator failed to resolve the heavy traffic in the city as it transitioned to a cashless payment system. Valenzuela Mayor Rex Gatchalian has suspended the business permit of NLEX Corporation over issues on the implementation of cashless transactions. Gatchalian said the defective RFID sensors along NLEX tollways are causing heavy traffic over the city's main thoroughfares.
Mga sensor na hindi built na lahat.
The NLEX management appealed to be given 15 days to respond to the concerns raised by the local executive. But Gatchalian rejected the plea and instead gave the company until today to provide an action plan. He added that motorists must still be able to use the expressway despite the suspension of its business permit.
They should stop collecting toll in the land area of Valenzuela and that they should also lift the barriers and allow people to move freely.
NLEX Corporation admitted the technical glitches in their system and vowed to improve the situation in the coming days.
Gusto rin naman namin humingi ng konting pag-unawa sa mga taga Valenzuela. Alam po namin na medyo mag-iilang araw na po na medyo nagkakasikipan po tayo dyan at gumagawa ho tayo ng paraan.
The management is also planning to find another place for the RFID installations to avoid additional traffic jam.
Meron naman tayong tuloy-tuloy na programa, number 1, para ayusin po yung mga sensor. Araw-araw po, pinapasyalan po yan. Number 2, yung po mga sticker ng mga sasakyan. Kapag po napapansin natin na medyo from time to time hindi po nababasa, meron po tayong mga tauhan doon sa toll gate itself na nakikita nila, nagkakaproblema, inire-report agad yon.
The company is set to send the action plan to Gatchalian's office before the said deadline. The managements of TPLEX and NLEX have recently signed a memorandum of agreement to conduct testing of their systems. Under the MOA, an auto-sweep RFID sticker will be activated using an EasyTrip account and vice versa. The test will involve 45 vehicles, which are equally composed of the different classifications. The Toll Regulatory Board said it aims to implement a policy of toll interoperability for the seamless travel of motorists. Robbie, toll barriers have been raised in the Mindanao Avenue toll booth following the suspension order of the local government of Valenzuela. Mayor Rex Gatchalian, however, assures the motorists that they can still pass through NLEX without having to pay the toll fee. Robbie?
Maraming salamat, Camille Samonte. And these are the other big stories today. The foreign spouses and children of Filipino citizens as well as balikbayas have started returning to the country. As of Monday, returnees must undergo swab testing upon arrival and they must secure booking at quarantine facilities. They must also have the Trace app for contact tracing, aside from wearing the usual face masks and shields. Balikbayans and their families will be given a visa-free entry privilege for a year. As the holidays approach, the volume of passengers at the Parañaque Integrated Terminal Exchange, or PTEX, is picking up daily, and now it is nearing its pre-pandemic levels. PTEX passengers have reached 60,000 Monday, and terminal authorities are expecting volume to climb to at least 80,000 in the coming weeks. Due to the surge, the health department said PTEX management will have to scale up its enforcement of basic health protocols. The Chinese Coast Guard has raised its presence in the West Philippine Sea this year despite the pandemic, that's according to a U.S. think tank. The U.S. Maritime Transparency Initiative flagged that Chinese forces conducted patrols at the Scarborough Shoal for 287 days from December 2019 to November 30, 2020. That is an 80% increase from the 160 days tallied in 2019. China also kept a persistent presence in Ayungin Shoal and Luconia Shoal, but appeared to have increased the frequency of patrols during the pandemic. The AFP says it is slowly catching up with our neighbors in the region in terms of defense capabilities. General Gapay puts the AFP at 60% of strength of our neighbors. Despite the pandemic, 2020 was a big year.
Actually, we're rebuilding and establishing a credible defense force that is at par with our neighboring countries. Right now, maybe masasabi natin we are already at 60% at par with our neighboring countries. But once yung mga nasa modernization pipeline, na-deliver na yan, medyo paparehas na tayo. And right now, we are gaining the respect of our neighbors as far as yung defense capability is concerned.
And joining us now is One News Defense Editor Manny Mogato. Manny, just how far behind are we? He said 60% capacity relative to our neighbors. Where do we really stand?
Oh, we are at least 15, 20 years behind our neighbors in terms of equipment and weapons, as well as in defense spending. You see, Singapore is on top of the countries in Southeast Asia with more than $13 billion in defense spending every year. And they are ranked up to the top 30 countries in the world with the highest annual defense spending. And behind them are Indonesia and Thailand, who both have $7 billion apiece every year. Next is Malaysia with $3 million, and perhaps we are ranked among the lowest. So we are at least 15 to 20 years behind because if you will develop submarines, which our neighbors already have, it needs 10 years to train our personnel and to develop and build a submarine base. So we're still behind, and we still don't have a multi-role fighter. And most of these countries in ASEAN have already F-16 fighters. We only have one missile frigate, and the rest have more than 3 or 4. So we're still very far behind our neighbors.
Given that, Manny, I mean, let's do a quick recap because General Gapay said we are ramping up. A quick review. What happened in 2020 in terms of our bringing up our capacity? Were there any major acquisitions? And for that matter, what do we expect in 2021?
Okay. For this year, despite the pandemic, we received our first frigate from South Korea. It's a missile capable. Then we received our Black Hawk helicopters from Poland. We also got some ground support planes from Brazil. And if the pandemic did not happen, we could have signed a contract with India for our first medium-range missile. These are short-to-ship missiles. And by next year, we'll be getting 8 fast craft armored missiles from Israel, as well as tanks from Israel, and probably 16 helicopters from Russia. So we are in an exciting times because this is the first time that the Philippines is getting missiles and modern equipment. For many, many years, the Philippines were lagging behind because our focus was fighting the insurgency.
Maraming salamat, Manny Mugato, One News Defense Editor. We'll go for a quick break. When the big story returns, a lawmaker is flagging China's spying and hacking activities in the Asia-Pacific for the past 5 years. And Barangay Ginebra is on the cusp of getting another PBA title after outpowering the TNT Tropang Giga in Game 4. A recap of the game that's coming up next. Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. National security concerns still hound Dito Telecommunities franchise. This after reports surfaced of Chinese espionage activities in the Asia-Pacific. But is the third telco player really involved? Ria Fernandez with this story.
Asia-Pacific economies have been the subject of Chinese espionage activities for 5 years or so, at least claimed by Senator Risa Ontiveros. During the Senate Public Services hearing on Dito Telecommunities franchise renewal bid, Senator Ontiveros claimed that a Chinese-sponsored group named Nikon has been hacking and spying several countries in the region, Brunei, Thailand, and the Philippines.
It's a very disturbing phenomenon. Ay isang kumpanya which I believe is acting as a proxy of the Chinese government.
Citing China's espionage law, Ontiveros said that the Chinese government can direct its citizens or companies abroad to spy. Democracy.net.ph co-founder engineer Pierre Gallia said commercial entities like Kaspersky and Trend Micro identified Nikon's activities. National Security Advisor Hermogenes Esperon acknowledged Nikon's espionage, but said that this has nothing to do with Dito being 40% Chinese-owned.
That Globe is not 100% Filipino company. Globe has Singtel as a partner, Singapore. Smart has another foreign partner, which is Indonesian. But all three companies are in extensive use of Huawei, which is a very hot subject of the trade war or economic war between the United States and China.
The co-chair of the National Cybersecurity Interagency Committee assured senators that safety provisions were included in the memorandum that greenlighted Dito's operations. He also noted the need to adopt cybersecurity measures and boost cyber defense.
Cyber defense is also another thing, and that is why we don't talk about it in the open, because a lot of these things are classified.
Engineer Gallia echoes this, saying that even terrorists such as ISIS take advantage of the internet. Despite this, Dito reiterates that it won't be a platform for spying.
To show our commitment to national security, the Dito Network Operations Center and Security Operations Center will be inaugurated this week. And we have invited our National Security Advisor, Secretary Hermogenes Esperon, and some members of the armed forces to an inspection.
The committee led by Senator Grace Poe will be holding an offline executive session to further discuss the national security issues raised against Dito's operations. Dito's franchise will expire 2023. Tamano said an early approval of their application would increase consumer confidence as they prepare for commercial launch March next year. In their offering is a pure 5G technology, faster internet speed, and cheaper rates. The National Telecommunications Commission said Dito's entry prompted Smart and Globe to heavily invest in internet infrastructure, but that it will be more beneficial if government will also spend on the national broadband program. While there was improvement, the agency said internet services continue to lag behind other Asian countries, ranking 32nd out of 50 when it comes to fixed broadband. For News 5, Ria Fernandez, We Are One News.
Now time for the big stories in sports. A look at the biggest game with Paolo Del Rosario.
Thanks, Robbie. Barangay Ginebra is on the brink of their first all-Filipino title in 13 years after outlasting the TNT Tropang Giga in a 98-88 victory in Sunday's Game 4. L.A. Tenorio was the man of the hour, scoring 9 of his team-high 22 points in the fourth quarter, fighting off a furious comeback attempt in the dying minutes. Coach Tim Cone reveals that the Teniente had his heart set on this All-Filipino Cup as soon as the buzzer sounded after their last title run in 2019.
Now we got to win the All-Filipino, and because that's been on his mind. So he's really been motivated by the fact of trying to win an All-Filipino. That's been his career goal. So I'm happy for him. So close, but yet so far.
Meanwhile, the TNT Tropang Giga side, RR Pugoy almost spoiled the Ginebra party with 3 straight bombs from deep to keep the game close. Real recognizes real, as Coach Tim Cone, Joe Devance, and Jared Dillinger noticeably approached Pugoy after the game with high praise. They said the sharpshooting guard played like a warrior, reminiscent of the legendary triggerman, Alan Kaidik.
Sabi nila fighter daw ako, di daw ako sumusuko. Sabi nga ni Coach Tim Cone, parang ano pa siya na grabe daw ako yung ganun. Pero yun, words lang yun. Sayang lang talaga na hindi na nanalo.
And those were the latest from the game. Back to you, Robbie.
Thank you, Paolo. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. 18 days before Christmas, tuloy pa rin ang Pasko, kapatid. I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News. Good evening.